are not familiar with WEV, and that may be the case, let me just tell you a little bit about what we do. We are a nonprofit that was founded 29 years ago. We provide training, consulting, and funding to women entrepreneurs.
Nikki, I just lost your sound. Uh-oh, did we lose Nikki? Okay, so what I will do
Can you see me?
Yes, there you are.
That was the first time that's ever happened to me, and hopefully the last.
That happened to me in a workshop with 200 people. It's super fun when that happens. Super fun.
Okay, well, it's good that you're co-host.
Yeah.
So
that's right. Well,
if this happens again, you know who you're with.
Yeah.
Let me just finish telling you a little bit about WEV, training, funding, coaching for women entrepreneurs. We've been founded for 29 years. We operate in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. And this morning, just some housekeeping. It's going to be very participative, and we do encourage everybody to share comments, thoughts, and answers to questions when Banks prompts them. We'd love you to be on video if you can. And I'm just checking that this is still recording because it may have stopped. Yes, okay. And I just want to tell you a few things about what's coming up at WEV. We're doing a lot more webinars these days. Obviously, that's kind of the preferred medium for training at the moment, and Zoom. So I'll just tell you about the financial education webinars. We have one on managing your debt. COVID has been quite challenging for a lot of us, and we're able to provide some guidance on strategies for managing your debt, so that you feel more in control of your finance and not quite so overwhelmed. And then the other one is on avoiding common year-end accounting mistakes. If you're a small business owner, how to not get tangled up in some of those year-end reconciliations and getting your records ready for taxes and that kind of thing. So a couple of those that are coming up. We have a full list on our website, weavonline.org. And in the spring and early part of next year, we'll be resuming our business planning workshops, trainings, and exploring entrepreneurship, and also doing a training on QuickBooks and how to use QuickBooks. The big thing that we've just launched is our Shop Local Market. That is now running through December 13th. It's an online virtual market that is made up of WEV clients. I think there are 56 WEV clients that you can find at this website. It will direct you kind of as a portal to get to their websites, and there's lots of amazing gift ideas, and you'll be supporting WEV's clients. So I do encourage you to check that out, do some Christmas shopping online. And now let me hand you over to Banks. So a few words about Banks. Banks is one of WEV's most favorite people. She is
I hate her to say that.
A much loved board member and has been for several years and a volunteer with WEV, but she is the founder of Banks Coaching, and so she's a professional certified coach. She is, in her own words, a recovering attorney, litigator, and all-around fabulous human being, and most importantly, she is a mum of 3 lovely children. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Banks.
Thank you, Nikki, and welcome everybody. I saw we had a couple more folks come on after we started. Welcome. I'm super glad you're here. And as Nikki mentioned, just an item of housekeeping, you know, I do love to see the whites of people's eyes. It makes it much more fun for me, and I think it makes it more fun for everyone engaged. So if you are in a position to do so and are comfortable doing so, please do turn on your videos so we can actually chat with each other. This is very much a workshop. This is not a 75-minute lecture on how to manage your time, because you guys know how to manage your time. This is going to be more of an exploration around how do we create balance? What is balance? What are some questions we can be asking ourselves in real time as we're trying to craft the lives we want for ourselves? So the more, this will either be about 20 minutes long if it's just me talking, or 75 minutes long if we have ideas from you guys. So I'm hoping it's the latter. Full disclosure, as Nikki said, I am very involved with WEV. It holds a very, very special place in my heart. It's an incredible organization. And I am so incredibly honored to be involved in this workshop series. Another piece of full disclosure is another reason that I have a vested interest in you all participating and making me look really good is because my mom is on the call today, and she's a total badass. And she is a dean at a university and a professor, and I love seeing her in action. And she said she wanted to, and I said, wait, you just make French toast for my kids on Saturdays, right? And she said, no, I do all this other cool stuff. So she said she wanted to see me in action. So I have a particularly vested interest in you guys making me look good today. So if we're on board with that, that would be great too. All right. So Nikki said, hi, Banks' mom. So let's see, before we get started with the facilitated content, I would love to hear from you guys, right? I told you I was going to start asking questions. What is your goal for the next 75 minutes? What would you like to get out of our time together so that I can make sure, and please feel free to raise your hand in chat so that we can start communicating. Does that make me a mini badass? God, I hope so. Or at least it gives me the genetic potential, right? So I'd like to hear from you guys. What would you like to get out of our time this morning? More me time.
Is it okay to just speak instead of?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested in trying to figure out how to get my work done more efficiently with all my kids and my husband at home because I had it before, but now it's just a whole different situation. So that's what I'm looking for, some more tips.
Okay, isn't that the truth? Okay, so tips and strategies for efficient time management, fair to say? Okay. Thank you, Harmony. You're my shill. That will definitely be covered. More emotional balance. I saw that in the chat. So far we have more me time, how to get work done more efficiently, more emotional balance.
Hi, Banks. Good morning.
Hello.
Hi.
You're Pilar, right?
I am.
Hi,
yes.
Pilar. Nice to see you.
Good morning, and good morning to everyone. I apologize. I didn't know how to change my name on the Galaxy thing. I think it just did it automatically, and I clicked just start because I'm late.
Glad you're here, Galaxy, right? SNE.
Right? I kind of like that, Galaxy. I love your name, by the way, Banks. That's so creative. So what I would love to get, I think similar to what I think another participant already mentioned, was just sort of like separating that work response from my home response, because, you know, the corporate response and the position I'm in, you know, I'm very making a lot of decisions. Sometimes I'm having, you know, difficult conversations, if you will, and I need to stand my ground in a different tone than I would with my family and with my kids. And so sometimes, you know, they're privy to those conversations, they're hearing all that, but then I address them in a different tone, and unintentionally they co-pollinate, if you will, right? And so
I will. Yes.
And so I struggle with that sometimes, just, you know, being able to shift on a dime. And I would love some insight.
Excellent. We'll absolutely be able to kind of get into that and how to make those choices. And I love how you brought up just that blur, right? That we're all, since March, we've all been kind of in this blur, especially if we worked out of the home. We're used to going to the office. You know, I mean, my daughter laughs at me. She's like, Mom, you're business casual all day long, like business on top, casual on the bottom, right? Like, I can't remember if we call them the last time I wore hard pants, you know, like, so life
slacks,
life just gets so blurred. And so that ability to create boundaries around our choice points is really important for our own sanity and to be able to create some of this balance. And I'm seeing some things in the chat come through. I'm committing to a schedule or a plan that includes work, family, and self-care. It's in my brain and sometimes even on my calendar, but then a work meeting pops up and I make that the priority. I am also in a corporate leader setting. Yes, we will definitely talk about that as well, how to stick to the plans that we say we want, but sometimes our actions belie that statement. How to prioritize when there are multiple buckets of to-do. Sometimes it feels like doing a little of everything and nothing is being done well. Yes, we will talk about that as well. Excellent. And Harmony from Shannon, sharing devices this morning with hubby and son on our TV monitor without the camera. Shannon, we miss seeing your gorgeous mug. A perfect example of scrambling and feeling unstructured. And isn't that the truth? You know, just my husband and I, he had a work meeting. We had to drive out to Ojai for school. We had carpool. I had this. And I was like, all right, one of our kids is just not going to school if you can't take them. Like, that's what's going to happen this morning. So, you know, it is a crazy, crazy time. And all of us, whether we admit it or not, are in a state of constant pivot. And I was saying to my friends the other day, I'm just tired of adjusting. It's just a series of constant adjustments. And that's exhausting. And so the idea of creating balance for ourselves has never been more crucial, timely, important. It plays into our sense of resilience. It plays into our fatigue levels. COVID fatigue is a very real thing. Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. It's particularly challenging when many of the things that used to bring us joy are now also on Zoom. So if we have Zoom fatigue from work and then someone says, hey, let's get on a 5 o'clock happy hour Zoom. You're like, oh God, the last thing I want to do is look at my screen. Or, hey, the ballet is having this amazing show on Zoom, right? So it's like all these things that we used to do that would bring us joy are now a much more difficult choice, because does this really bring us joy? Does this really fill us up? Or does this feel like more like work? So we will explore all of these great ideas: more me time, how to be efficient, emotional balance, proactivity, separation and boundaries, self-care. We will be looking at all of those from a more macro level. So hopefully you will get something out of it. And my intention is that, you know, we will have lots of dialogue throughout, and then at the end have some time to come together and discuss kind of what our takeaways are as we go off into our Wednesday. Anything else? I saw a couple of folks just joined. Welcome. We're super glad you're here. We're just asking the question of what would you like to get out of this morning? So we're just kind of wrapping that up. We've got lots of good ideas, but please do think about that, and feel free to add to the chat. I will be keeping an eye on that as we go forward. And then Nikki, if I'm in the middle of talking and a question comes through, feel free to interrupt me. This is, as I mentioned, very participatory. So welcome, Jennifer and Jackie and anyone else who just logged on. Great to see you, and we're super glad you're here. All right. So with that being said, also feel free, if you're path to sanity. Oh, Jennifer, girl, don't we all? I will do my best. And maybe if not, at least we can commiserate about how insane we feel, right? Build a little connection. And also feel free, I'm always curious to know how old people's kids are. You know, who are your people? Or if you're a caregiver, you know, this is working parents, but it's also working caregivers. You know, are we caregivers for a loved one, for a spouse, for a partner, for a parent, for four-legged babies? You know, who are taking, you know, our emotional energy, right? And that we're trying to create balance. So I have 3 teenagers. My twins are almost 14. My daughter is 16. So we are all about high school, middle school, social justice issues, being conscious of the news, trying to help my kids integrate that while being in the middle of a pandemic, while doing online school, while I also have my own practice. So that's the balance that I'm living. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, you guys, for starting to put this in. We've got parents of teenagers. We have caregivers for family. We have younger kiddos. Awesome. So that can help enrich our discussion today as we start to build community about our lived realities every day. Because, you know, spoiler alert, one of the best ways we can have balance is to build connection with others. That can help refill our emotional sponge. All right. So having said that, I will go ahead and start with the facilitated content that I have prepared. So can everybody see my screen? Work-life balance for working parents? Okay, excellent. This is my info down here. If you want to get in touch with me for any reason after our talk today, please don't hesitate to do so. My website is bankscoaching.com. It's a little on the nose, I know, but it's easy to remember. So feel free to reach out anytime. I always love talking about all things executive coaching related. Oh, and just as a side note, my practice, I like to say I help successful people be more successful. My practice is a national practice. I work with large organizations and individual clients, a lot of whom are successful business leaders, on emotional intelligence, leadership, communication, work-life balance, and a lot of these issues that come up. Basically, how to look at what's working for us, how to leverage what is already working to help develop some skills that can help us be more successful. So that is my jam. It's where I live, and feel free to reach out anytime. So the first question is balance? What balance, right? I think there's this myth out there that there's some Elysian field where work-life balance exists. And if I just build the right boat or build the right bridge, I can get there and just live there with all the unicorns and leprechauns and just be happy, right? Spoiler alert, that's not a thing, right? So the sooner that we can disabuse ourselves of the fact that there's something out there that we can achieve, then the sooner we can start to do the work in here to start creating the lives we want. And the reason that I say that is because so many of us think someone can tell me how to get balance, right? If I told you how to get balance, I would be telling you how I try to get balance, or I would be telling you what I think balance should look like for you. That's also not a thing. The only person who can decide what balance looks like for you or for me is myself or yourself, right? Is me or you. So really, the first thing we're starting to think about is, what is balance? And do we go in and out of it? I love this cartoon from the New Yorker. Okay, now on 3, I'm going to toss a second job in there, right? How many of us feel like this most of the time? I'd love to see some hands raised if you guys agree or not, right? That's probably a social. For the gentleman in the room as well. This happens to be a woman, but it's true for all of us. We're all working from home. We're all juggling all these different things. You know, put some UGG boots on her, and that's pretty much me every day. And, you know, trying to figure out how we balance being a working parent, being a parenting parent, and then I laugh with my friends, being a prison warden, coach, PE teacher, therapist, and all the other things that show up when we are parenting kiddos at home. So what we're going to be talking about today, there'll be quite a bit of information, but if you only remember 2 things, these are they: awareness and action, the 2 A's. So when we're thinking about creating balance of any kind, the first thing we are looking to create for ourselves is a sense of awareness. Being aware of how we are, being aware of what we want, being aware of what our reality is, what reality we want to create, what the challenges are to that, starting to create a greater sense of presence and awareness in the now. And I know I'm sounding a little bit yogic, and I'm going to fall on that sword, but really starting to stay focused on, this is not out there that I go and find balance or build that bridge. This is internally, right? What awareness do I have around my experience and what I want to create? Then the second piece is, once I develop that awareness, what action can I take? And what does that look like? So we'll talk about both of those pieces more in depth and have an opportunity to explore and mine the wisdom in the room in terms of challenges, strategies that we've found that we can share with each other. So awareness. The way that I like to think of balance is that balance is a practice. Balance, again, is not a destination. It's a practice. And the overused trope for balance is the pendulum, right? Is, you know, you're going too far over onto the work side, and then you're going too far over onto the life side, or maybe it's too far over onto the like school sports on Saturday, or maybe, you know, whatever it is. And we're always trying to find kind of that sweet spot. And if we think about a pendulum, or if we, you know, another metaphor that people use is a boat, you know, on the ocean, that you're up, you're down, you're all around, you kind of want to be in the middle, or even a tightrope walker, right? You're always trying to find that sweet spot. But if we think about a tightrope walker, say that 3 times fast, you know, where the tightrope walker is always seeking balance. And so they're always correcting. They don't just get there and stay there. They're always correcting. And so when we're looking at balance as a practice, there's actually kind of a flow chart, and I love me a good flow chart. The first thing is, how do we make decisions? And we'll look more into that specifically. The next piece is, so once we understand how we make decisions and how our brains work, I'm going to throw some biology at you, so just get prepared. Then we look at, how do I feel right now? And that we're going to look at a little bit more in depth. Then we can look at, okay, given how my brain works and how do I feel, what do I want? And that's only, you know, if you word it the way I usually do, what do I want? That's only 4 words. But it's a simple but not easy question, right? So some of us like to modify it with, what do I want right now? How do I want to feel? You know, there are a variety of different ways we can start thinking about that question. And then the 4th piece is, what are our choices? And once we get to that piece of the awareness, what are our choices, organically moves us into action. And what are our choices around action? So then when we get into action, what we're looking at, which many of you mentioned at the beginning, are strategies to create balance. And we'll talk about a couple of those. The importance of asking what we need. And I'm hoping we'll have some robust discussion around that. I know that tends to be a bit of a hot button for a lot of us. And then asking ourselves the tough question. And I'm not going to tell you what the tough question is. You have to wait till the end to find out what the tough question is. So here's the first opportunity for us to really connect with each other and start to build some awareness. And we can either use the chat or feel free to speak up, whichever you're more comfortable with, given your environment, if you can speak or not. But really, I would like everybody to play on this. So whether you play by chat or, actually, let's do that. Everybody write in the chat 1 word that describes how you feel right now. I love to start see the words scrolling through. This is one of my favorite things to do. Conflicted, busy, hopeful. Conflicted. Worried, proud. That's my mom. Thanks, Mom. Back emotionally so I don't lose it. Oh, been there. Juggling, overwhelmed. I'm going to put whelmed. I'm not quite overwhelmed, but I'm definitely whelmed. Juggling, not myself, and neither is anyone else. Yep. So what we can start to see, and the reason that I love this, stressed, yep, is that what we can start to notice is that we're all in different places. And this is just one moment in time on a Wednesday morning, right? So looking at this, we can see that some people feel proud, some people feel worried, some people feel hopeful. Some people, you know, sometimes I'll see grateful or having an okay day today, or stressed or not myself. And so what we can start to realize is that when we just do a spot check-in, it's an incredibly powerful awareness just to start to get, like, how am I today? How am I feeling? How often do I ask myself that question? I ask my kids, ask my partner, ask my colleagues. If I'm in charge of a team, I ask my team how they're doing, right? Connected, Teresa, love that. You know, so the first piece around creating balance is finding opportunities at work or at home to start dropping into awareness and to start building connection around it. Because particularly when we're at work, or frankly with our partners, if we co-parent, or if we're with other adults in our home, we have an opportunity to start to articulate where we are today, and to start to check in with that person, how they are today, and to start leaning on each other. Because if I'm having a more resilient day, I can be a resource for you if you're not feeling as resilient. And if I'm not feeling resilient today, I can name that in a very safe way and say, hey, I'm not at 100%. I'm needing a little bit of support. A great tool I just read about in the Wall Street Journal that a company was using with their clients, and this isn't necessarily work-life balance, but it can help bring that balance into work, which comes into home, is just doing a daily check-in with teams to ask if they're above the line or below the line. I wish I came up with this because it's genius. And so without having to go into personal detail, which people have varying degrees of comfort with, to just check in and say, all right, guys, how are we doing today? Who's above the line? Who's below the line? So that people can start to see how we're doing and to start to say, okay, I'm feeling above the line. Who needs help? I'm feeling below the line. I could use a little backup on this. And it's a great kind of lingo that we can even start using in our families with our partners. You know, hey, babe, I'm feeling a little below the line today. Can you drive carpool? You know, or which I didn't use that exact language, but it might have involved more of a like threat of our kid not going to school. But that, you know, those kinds of discussions definitely are happening in our home. So the first piece around awareness is just to know where we are, and then to understand where we are with other people. Jennifer just brought up a terrific point, which is another level for single parents, no rotation or help in the home. Please consider. Absolutely. So for people who are the primary adult in a home, it becomes even more crucial to find the trusted adults who can be your squad. Right? So, and for some of us, even the other trusted adult in our family isn't the squad. For some of us, it's a couple of close girlfriends or close guy friends that we feel that we can be present with and say, hey, can you get my kid at school today? You know, or something like that. So we're going to talk more about this later when we talk about knowing what we need and asking for help. So this is an incredibly powerful practice to start knowing if we're above the line or below the line in a moment. And then starting to identify that awareness so we can start creating action and make choices. Jennifer, thank you for bringing that up. That was a terrific point, and certainly not, it was not the intention to be exclusionary on that. So I appreciate your bringing that into the discussion. Oh, Elise, I love the emoji chart. That sounds really fun. And I love having the chat going while I'm talking, because that means we can all share our ideas and have some robust discussion. So now going back to our content. Oops, it just beeped at me. So now we're going to talk a little bit, now that we know kind of where we are and how we are today, right? In this moment, and it could change by lunch, right? Then how are we feeling? Hungry, right? So just kind of being present with what's going on. How do we make decisions? Now I'm going to drop a little bit of neuroscience on you. So if I have any neurobiologists in the room, this is going to be very top level. This is neuroscience for lawyers. But it is interesting to start to think about how our brains actually make decisions. Because when we understand this, we can understand why we do things like, as was mentioned at the very beginning, make a plan to do X, have a work meeting come up, and make a choice to do something else. A classic one for me is I will plan every day to work out and not work out most days because I will prioritize other things in front of it. So how do we make decisions? And when we understand that, how can we be smarter about how we make decisions? So human beings are neurobiologically emotion-driven decision makers. So I think most of us are caregivers in the room. Does anybody recognize these folks? Call it out. Come on, Harmony, I know you know. Are you unmuting? Okay, somebody call it out. Who are these?
Sorry,
people?
I was talking to myself. I do that when I write. I just talk to myself. Well, there are emotions from that Disney Pixar movie, but I can't name them.
Okay, you're absolutely right. These are the animated emotions from Inside Out, which, if you have not seen it, is a terrific movie grounded in such good science, and it's so relatable to young people about how we make decisions. And so from the left to the right, we have sadness, fear, disgust, joy, and anger. And this is simplified. If you look at the research, there are arguments that there are maybe 7 or 8 rather than 5, but these are the 5 primary, disgust or disdain, judgment. These are the 5 primary kind of areas. And these are the areas, and and emotions that design how we make decisions. So if you remember Inside Out, they have the control panel, and different emotions are controlling the control panel at different times. This is actually a biological function. A lot of us think about being emotional, air quotes, as being a bad thing. The reality is that every single one of us makes decisions based on emotion. So even when we're talking to and understanding that, and I have whole 3-day workshops on emotional intelligence, how to be more persuasive, how to speak to your audience, how to build collegial teams and collaborate. And it all comes back to this, which is understanding what motivates people and then understanding how to speak to them. So to get them to want to do what you want to do. Now what we're doing is taking that rationale and turning it into ourselves, right? Because we often think, how do other people make decisions? Oh, they're emotion-based decision makers. But we have a huge blind spot when it comes to how we make decisions and the emotions that impact our own decision making. You know, in the law, we would often say, you know, make it so idiot-proof that even the judge will want to find for you, right? Understanding that even the most rationally based people are going to be motivated by emotion, and emotion is persuasive. So what we're looking at when we're thinking about emotion is the decision-making brain. And so if this were a more complete picture, you'd see the brainstem kind of coming off down to the right a little bit. But the way that we evolved is that we evolved from back to front. So if we think about our brainstem and our reptilian brain and the amygdala here, that actually sits inside the center of your brain at the base of your brainstem, where it connects to the higher order parts of your brain. The amygdala is the part of your brain that controls fight, flight, or freeze. It's a really, really important part of our brains, because this is the part of our brains that for Paleolithic man said, don't go in the cave with the lion in it, right? You hear a roar, you're not going to take your whole family tribe in there. That also is a part of your brain that remembers it for the rest of your life, that's not a safe place to be. So when our amygdala fires, something happens that causes us to have some fear response. It's called our limbic system, and our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. When that starts firing, it floods the whole rest of our brain. So all of our higher order thinking goes out the window. Think about our toddlers, right? Or, you know, certain adults we know who don't have a strong capacity for self-regulation, right? When our limbic system gets flooded, we feel threatened, we feel afraid, we feel angry. It will flood everything else, and we're unable to make decisions that are thought through, right? But it's really important. So, and the other thing about our amygdala is that it only takes 1 or 2 negative hits to our amygdala to permanently rewire our chemistry. That's how our brains develop as individuals. What inputs do we have, and how do we start to respond to those things? So it's really important to be aware of when we have a fear response come up, or that, you know, and fear is the basis of a lot of different, the 7 deadly sins are all fear responses: gluttony, anger, lust, you name them, they're all fear responses. So when we're having a fear response, it's important to be able to start to think, is this fear or fact? Because feelings are not fact, right? Feelings are important and they're evidence, but they're not fact. So what is this response telling me? And starting to get awareness around, what is this response telling me about what's important to me, what my values are, what I want, what I don't want. Then we start moving into our higher order thinking, which happens more in our frontal lobe, which is the area that controls our emotional control and executive functioning, and our prefrontal cortex. And what I want to talk to you about with the prefrontal cortex is it's a very specific part of our frontal lobe that a guy at USC named Antonio Damasio has done a lot of work around. And he did this fascinating study, and Nikki's heard me talk about this like 12 times because it's like my favorite thing. He did this study where he found a statistically significant group of people who had had brain trauma, blunt brain trauma, to their prefrontal cortex, but were otherwise neurologically intact. So they looked like you or me, but they had this trauma that knocked out their emotion center of their brain. And what he found is that when they were trying to make a decision, they could do a T-chart with the pros and the cons, and they could think it through, and they could rationalize, and they could have flow charts, and they could think through a problem like nobody's business. But when it came down to the moment of making a decision, they were incapable of making a decision. of making a choice, up to and including the color of their socks. And what that tells us is that this emotion center of our brain is crucial in how we make decisions. And if we're not paying attention to that, or if we're devaluing that or minimizing it, then we are not paying attention to the vast majority of evidence we have about what is important to us. And if we're not aware of that with others, which is another workshop, then we are not aware of how we can be influential and persuasive and do our best work. So understanding that we are emotion-based decision makers is not saying, oh, we're so emotional. It's saying, this is the jam. This is where we are. And when we have someone who says, well, I'm not emotion, and I have these clients, well, I'm not an emotion-based decision maker. I'm an accountant. I based everything on numbers. But if we go deeper, you base things on numbers because they make you feel safe in your decision making. That the decision that you're making is validated by some extrinsic source. You talk to somebody who uses softer evidence, air quotes on softer, again, qualitative evidence, not quantitative evidence. They don't need those numbers. That's neither here nor there. It just speaks to how we make decisions. And at the end of the day, we are emotion-based decision makers. So what does that mean for us in terms of achieving work-life balance, right? What it means is we'll only achieve balance when we are emotionally attached to a different outcome than what we have, so much so that we're willing to make the hard choices necessary to create it. So read that again. Only achieve it when we are emotionally attached to a different outcome so that we are willing to make the hard choices. So what this means is a lot of times we say we want something, but then we don't make the choices to manifest it. And the hard truth is, you know, one of the real eye-opening things that someone said to me once is, what if I just say to you, nobody is coming to rescue you? Right? How powerful is that? That's incredibly powerful. I can't wait for someone to create the reality I want. I have to be so emotionally attached to what I want. It has to hit so deep in my soul that what I want is something that I'm willing to start making choices to create for myself. And sometimes that means making really hard choices. One construct that I love, that I've been thinking a lot about in the last year and a half, is the idea of want versus should. There's a great saying that we should all over ourselves, right? If we are living in should, we will never be motivated. We will never stay sustained. I talk about this a lot in workshops right now about sustained motivation in COVID, sustained resilience, building connection. If we are in should, or if we find ourselves using the word I should, I need to, I ought to, if we find ourselves using that language, even internally, we have an opportunity to pause, create some awareness around that language without judgment, say, wow, look at that, I'm using a lot of should. What happens if I change that word to want? Is that still the same sentence? So that can be a really powerful construct on a tool for starting to think about balance and motivation. When we're starting to think really granularly about, are we in should or are we in want? Because if we're in should, we're not emotionally attached to a different outcome and we're not in the present. Should means we think something should be other than what it is. But when we're in acceptance of what is, and we're clear about what we want, we can start making some choices to get there. The other piece I wanted to touch on briefly is the idea that feelings are not fact. So, and it's important to understand those distinctions because facts exist neutrally in space. They just exist. And I had a great sense of perspective on this when I was on my trip to Arizona, which is right here, like 2 weeks ago. Which when you're standing next to a dinosaur footprint and it's the same size as your kid's boot print on a inland sea that existed millions of years before those dinosaurs existed, which exist millions of years before we exist, you get an incredible sense of the fact that our species is but a blip in geologic time. So if we all blow ourselves up in a nuclear holocaust tomorrow, that's just a fact. Mama Earth is going to be just fine. And it really doesn't matter, right? It's just a fact. Oh, look, humans blew themselves up, right? It matters to us because we're humans, because we're emotionally attached to that outcome. We don't want to blow ourselves up, right? So when we have a fact it's really useful for us to start to use the emotions that we attach to that fact that give it significance to tell us about what we want. My example from personal experience is I am afraid to fly, so much so that I did a fear of flying clinic in my early 20s, before 9/11, and you could still go into all the places. Flying is safe. My brain knows that flying is safe. My limbic system and my amygdala, every time I get on an airplane, tell me I'm about to die. So my fear is not fact. My fear is attached to the fact. So I have a choice. I can either not fly to avoid that feeling, or I can say, okay, I still want to fly for work or go on a trip with my family. And that means I'm going to need to get on an airplane. So what are my choices to deal with the emotion? Right? So when we start to parse out fact and emotion, we can start to get a sense of what do we want for reals. So when we start to think about balance and what do I want, we really can start to look at what does work-life balance look like for me specifically. And I'd like to pause here and start to look at that. So for you guys, what does work-life balance look like for you specifically? More work, more life, time to X. How do you feel? Feel free to chime in verbally I would love to hear verbally because it's fun to chat, but also in the chat box if that works better for you.
Hi, Banks.
Hey, Pilar. Oh, you changed your name.
I guess I'll go. No, I didn't.
Oh my
Did
gosh,
it change on its own?
Yeah, it did. You're not Galaxy
I had a
S10e
little
anymore.
intervention.
Oh, you did? Thanks, Nikki.
Nice, thank you. So, work-life balance to me, and I've thought about this quite a bit right now more than ever, but work-life balance to me really means being there for my family when they need me. And it's not, I'll get to that in an hour. It's not, that's gonna have to wait. If your kids need you, they need you. And, I'm so grateful that I'm able to work from home and that we're all home together, because if my kids need me, they need me like now. And sometimes it can't wait. They're very respectful, they're very patient. But I love being able to balance their needs first, because they are my true priority. And, I just, being able to address that to me is so important that I don't have to put them on hold. They're not on the back burner. And if, I've got a 17-year-old and an almost 10-year-old. And so, my 10-year-old is right behind me in class. The table's a mess right now. But, if he needs me and he has a question, that's my priority. That is my life. That is, my legacy. That is my purpose. That is why I'm, good at what I do as a professional career, and so to me, work-life balance really is being in a position to meet their needs first when they need it and not putting them on hold, which I feel when I was at the office, I had to do because I just physically wasn't in their space. Well, honey, that's going to have to work, wait till I get home, And so I would say in general that, not to take too much time, but
yeah, no, love it, Pilar. And Jennifer, I saw that you had your hand raised. Hello.
Hello, I was typing. So for me, work-life balance is about prioritizing my health, right? So like I need to do my exercises for my physical therapy, but I have a meeting, so work, I have a work deadline, so that goes, that gets shot to hell.
Yeah.
So so making sure that I reserve my time for me with my sister friends to kind of ground myself. And like they're home, like my daughter's homeschooling, like that's gonna happen, right? But so that I just make sure I carve out time for my rewind.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Side note, I was diagnosed with MS in my early 30s. And so I hear you. Girl, yes.
I don't claim or accept it, but yes, ma'am, absolutely.
It's a diagnosis. Don't own it. You just diagnose with it. And
Absolutely.
so we'll have to connect on that front soon. But it's, you know, I feel you that, you know, and for me, I have to be so attached to the benefit of what, as you were mentioning, that time for yourself, time with friends, all these pieces. I have to be attached to feeling better. That has to be important to me. And I have to love myself enough, right? I have to love myself so much that I am willing to make choices to manifest that in my life. I have to be so emotionally attached to that, that when the work meeting comes up or the client needs to call me and I have a walk scheduled with a friend, I say no, right? And that's not an easy thing to do. And we'll get to that too. So, you know, there are work-life balance. Thank you for bringing that up. Can be a lot of things, and they need to be important to us. They have to be so, so important.
Can I also add just like for us, the eating part, right? So with COVID, you know, friends are gaining weight or losing weight or whatever. But for us, like, you know, our brains we are what we eat, right? So we have to eat good food. But with COVID, you know, I'm eating junk.
Oh, total takeout all the time. Yeah.
So prioritizing the menu planning and
and the chores. Yeah, prioritizing the chores. No, it's all good. No, it's so many of these pieces come in to what is balance for me. Is it health? Is it family? Is it more work? I mean, I've been in times in my life where I'm like, I've got all the family going on right now. I want more work. How do I get that or make more time for work? So it's not always I want more life, right? So then we get to this place where we've created this awareness of I know what I want. Right. And so this is something for you guys. Obviously, we're not all going to answer this question in 5 minutes, but it's really starting to think, what do I want? Like really? Sometimes with my clients, I'll encourage them to keep one of those little old school notebooks with the spiral top on the, you know, thing on the top, just in their back pocket. So when they think, oh, I'm doing this, this feels really good. I want more of this. It can be, you can start or write a note in your phone. It feels really good to chat with my friend. I want to do this 3 times a week. Or, you know, those starting to become aware of what feels good and feels balanced, what we're noticing about when we're feeling balanced, what choices we're making. We can start doing more of that. And so it's now we're starting to move into the action phase, right? Now I know what I want. What are my choices? I know what balance looks like for me. I'm so emotionally attached to it that I am willing to make hard choices to make it happen. What are my choices? So here we get to some strategies. This to me is frankly the least interesting part of this talk, because you can go on Google for strategies for time management and there are a zillion, right? So I'll give you a couple. To me, there are 2 different types of coaching. There's transformational coaching and there's transactional coaching. Transformational coaching is really getting to what's underneath the surface of what motivates us, what keeps us in the game. That's what we've been talking about, these transformational pieces of staying engaged with the want. The transactional piece is more the how. So once you figure out, it's awareness and action, the what and the how, however you want to phrase it up. Now we're in the how piece. The first strategy to create balance is to start to get some clarity around control. Most of my clients who are really challenged with work-life balance have control is one of the biggest awarenesses we can create, right? There is a sense of wanting control of everything, right? For a lot of us, I'll cop to that. I want to be in control of everything, right? But I'm not, right? And that makes me mad. And then I get frustrated and I don't have balance, right? So when we can start to get clarity around control, what do I want? I mean, how can I create work-life balance? Again, broken record, if I don't know what I want. Given what I want, what can I control? The metaphor that I use for myself is what's in my jigsaw piece. There's a big, huge puzzle of the universe, and I am my little jigsaw piece. What is in my jigsaw piece? What can I control? And when we start, and then what am I not in control of? And starting to get real clarity around that so that we can start to let go of the things we can't control. And one person mentioned in the chat that they, are thinking they might do something and then a call comes from work and they're worried about letting their team down. Okay. This is a classic control question, right? What other people think about us is none of our business. It's not something we can control. And the more time we spend trying to control what other people think about us, the less time we're spending creating work-life balance for ourselves. So if we're really more emotionally, so here's the emotional attachment piece. If we are more emotionally attached to what people think about us than to what we want to create for ourselves, we will never create that balance. We will never create what we want, because we will always make choices to validate our perception of what other people think about us. That's just one example. That's neither good nor bad. Again, no judgment. It's just a fact. It's neutral. If we make choices to validate X, X will manifest. If we make choices to validate Y, Y will manifest. It's that simple, but it's not easy because we are emotional beings and things are important to us. So starting to think about what can I control? It's not just what can I control, like what my kid's eating for lunch. It's what can I control about my environment? And then once we start getting clear about that, this big question, this is a hard one. What am I willing to let go of in favor of what I value? And actually, I just said that this is a hard one. I'm going to reframe that. This is an incredibly freeing one. Because once we start getting clear about what I'm willing to let go of in favor of what I value, then we can start making some choices. So if it's, for example, Pilar, I loved your example of, I want to be available for my family. And then you said, and I'm going to quote you, when they need me. That's a really powerful modifier. That's frankly, which is, if that's where you want to be, then your choice point is there's going to be a lot of control questions coming up around that. If you want to be available when they need you, then there's going to need to be a high degree of flexibility on these other pieces. And if that flexibility isn't in place, then it's going to be there's going to be a rub between what you want and the reality that exists. So there is a choice point around creating flexibility.
Yeah, and I can relate to that, right? Because you have, when you said, how are you feeling? Conflicted, right? That was one of my words, because I have, my children and their needs, but then I'm also conflicted with work and the demand that, and the responsibility and things of that nature. And so you're always in this fine line of confliction, and, is it a dire need over here with the family, or can it wait? And then, and
I would offer, let me just interrupt really quick. I would offer on that for everyone that conflict, or the rub, as I call it, is not bad. That's not bad. It's uncomfortable, but it's not bad, because that's where all the good stuff happens.
Yes.
That's where we start to get these data points around what's important to us. Two things that are important to me are coming into a rub. I'm not even going to use the word conflict. I'm going to use the word rub. They're just rubbing against each other. What clarity there, that tells me that I'm in a place where I can start to create some awareness and clarity around these two things aren't working harmoniously for me right now. So what awareness can I create about that, about what I want each of those things to look like? What are my choices around that? And then frankly, what am I willing to let go of? Am I willing to let go a little bit of perception in order to validate? And how do I do that? Is it communication with my team? Is it setting aside time? That's when we start to get to the how that you guys already know how to do. You guys are successful people. I'm not worried about your ability to implement. I am curious about the clarity and the motivation. That's the transformational piece. Once we get the clarity and the motivation, we're emotionally attached to the outcome. We know what our choices are and we're willing to make the choices. Then it's just tactical. Then it's, I need to set this time aside. I need to talk to my team. It's whatever it is. Or I need to tell my kids that I'm in a meeting. I'll talk to them in 2 hours, whatever those pieces are. So it really, what am I willing to let go of is a big piece. Again, staying in the present. This isn't some big, giant thing that we're trying to control. It's what do I need right now? How do I want to feel right now? What are my choices? A couple of just great prioritization visualizations that I love are the big rocks or the glass balls. there are two. A lot of us have seen these corporate workshops. A lot of us are familiar with these, but it's this idea of if you have a vase that's empty and next to it you have a container full of big rocks, medium-sized rocks, sand, and water, right? Let's say the big rocks are the things that are really important to you. Health, family, work, whatever it is, that's really, really important to you. Your medium-sized rocks are kind of some tactical things, big projects, your kid's mission project, your sister's doctor's appointment, things like that. And then we're getting to the smaller rocks, or the gravel, which are kind of, smaller things. And you get to the sand, which is like emails and texts, and then the water, which is just even more chaff than that. If you pour all the water in first of all the little tiny minutia, and you fill it up with all the water, the minute you put a big rock in, it's going to overflow, right? But if you reverse it and you start with picking the big rocks that are important to you and you put those in, then you put in the medium-sized rocks that fit, then you put in the gravel and the sand that fits, and then the rest is the water. That's when we can start thinking that's a strategy for time management. That's a strategy for prioritization. It's a great way to start thinking, what are my big rocks? So for Jennifer and me, a big rock is health. I think it is true for a lot of us, but we have a, slightly, maybe a different approach to it. For someone else, it might be, time in the morning to have a cup of coffee and read the paper before the day starts. That could be a big rock, right? Could be me time. It could be connecting with a friend. Whatever our big rocks are for us, go in first. And then we have to be so emotionally attached to the benefit of how we feel when we do that, that we're willing to make the choices. Another piece, and then basically, if you don't get some of the water in there, that's fine, because it's probably like stupid spam emails anyway, right? So, have a friend go through, oh, look at that beautiful person. Good morning. I'm so glad you're here. Oh my gosh, love. So the other one are the glass balls analogy. And this is just juggling. This is just, we're all juggling, we're all spinning plates. And if we're thinking about the balls that we're juggling, which balls are rubber balls and which balls are glass balls? The glass balls are the ones that are going to break if we drop them. Family, work, whatever it is for us, health, anything that we think is a glass ball, those are the ones that have to stay in play. Rubber balls are the ones that'll bounce if we drop them. And balls get dropped. It's fine. No big deal. No shame in the game, right? So what can we drop that won't break? And that's another way to start thinking, what are my glass balls? Another piece when we're thinking about what we want and what are our glass balls and what are our big rocks is not only are we thinking we have to be emotionally attached to what we want, but a great way to think about this too is to be so emotionally attached to the benefit of making those choices. So it's not only what we want, but the benefit that we get from making those choices. That keeps us motivated. So if the benefit is more availability, more emotional availability, more resilience, less fatigue, more clarity, something that we can really sink our teeth into as being a benefit we really want, that will help us when we're making those choices to let the water and the gravel fall out of the vase and say, you know what, I don't need to make it to that meeting. I think this person can handle it. I'm going to go and take my, sister for a walk, or I am going to go and take my kid to the playground, or I'm going to go and take a bubble bath, right? Because I'm out. So here is where we get to vulnerability. For many of us, did someone want to say something? I just heard someone.
Yeah, sorry, Banks, there's a couple of questions in the chat box.
Absolutely. Go for it.
So the first is, and so tracking back to the emotional response, can we have a reasonable expectation of being able to control our emotional response?
What do you guys think? The answer is yes. Yes, but yes and no. Okay, I'm going to give you the lawyer answer. You guys ready? It depends. Yes and no, because there are things that are hardwired into our brain. I'm a trauma survivor. If something triggers my trauma, I have no expectation of being able to control my response, but I can have an awareness around my response, and then I can make choices based on awareness, right? So there are definitely times that we can control our responses. or be mindful of them? It's a great question. So one framework that I love, that actually I was thinking of in a couple of the questions at the beginning, is the difference between reacting and responding. When we react, we are dysregulated, right? We're in an emotional state, we're just reacting. If we're responding, we are being mindful of, and we're aware, and we're making choices. So I would say, do we control our emotional reactions? No, we don't control our emotions, but we can be aware of our emotions and then let that inform our actions. And we absolutely can control our actions and our choices. So that's the distinction that I would make there, that our emotions can inform our choices and our actions and our behaviors. I mean, unless we're talking about, a deeper level, certainly therapeutic support, deeper level healing, which I advocate strongly, can help with awareness and starting to help re-regulate dysregulation. There's medical support we can get. Like, yes, there are tools we can have if we have severe dysregulation. But if we're talking about otherwise emotionally healthy adults who are navigating, a challenging situation, we will have emotions come up. And then, of course, mindfulness tools can help us address them. Breathing, yoga, awareness, all of these different tools that exist. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. And then another question is, can you offer some ideas for personal accountability, ideas for ways to keep or meet the self-care or the work accountability? Identifying the big rocks helps a lot to identify the priorities, but I struggle with honoring the plan and the follow through.
Okay, that's what we're on right now.
Perfect.
So I will get to that. Is there another question before we move on to that?
There is not at this
Okay,
point.
so accountability is a big one. And accountability is about vulnerability. Accountability is about knowing what we're afraid of. Why are we not staying accountable? What are we afraid of? And when we're clear about what we're afraid of, we can decide if we want to validate that or the other. It really is about that clarity. So when we talk about vulnerability, a lot comes up for a lot of us. A lot of us are high achieving people. We have been trained to be able to do things independently. The classic for me that I had to unlearn, I can do this all by myself. I can do this all by myself, right? The only people who say they can do things all by themselves are 2-year-olds, right? So unless we want to be an emotional 2-year-old, we are not going to do this all by myself, right? So I argue, and a lot of progressive thinkers argue, and there's a lot of research around this area that's emerging. Brene Brown is a classic. She's got a lot of great work around this, that vulnerability is a radical and subversive act of self-care. Right? Radical. And I say radical and subversive because it flies in the face of everything we are socialized to believe. Right? We wouldn't worry about what people think of us at work if we hadn't been trained to think that how we show up at work is more important than how we show up at home. Right? So starting to get vulnerable in a professionally appropriate way or an interpersonally appropriate way is a radical and subversive act of self-care. It's saying I matter. So let's think about that for a second. How often do we go through our days, men, women, anyone in the world, and really say, I matter? This is not selfish. It is not self-centered. It is not egomaniacal. It is purely a validation that I matter. And I have emotions, and I attach them to facts, and they're important to me. That doesn't mean I get my way all the time. That doesn't mean that I don't sacrifice things. That doesn't mean that I'm an egomaniac or a jerk. It just means that I matter. And so if we want to start being accountable, we not only have to get really clear about what we want, but also being comfortable facing what we're afraid of. Right? And starting to be comfortable getting a little bit vulnerable. So we're getting a little low on time, and I want to open this up at the end for more conversation. So I'm just going to put this out for us to think about. We're not going to chat about this one right now, but this is a great question to start reflecting about when we're thinking about accountability. What comes up for me when I think about vulnerability? Because accountability will never come from the outside. It will never come from the outside. It has to come from the inside. What you want has to matter more than what you're giving up or what you're afraid of. So what it comes down to is, how do I feel about asking for help? Are we in, I can do it all by myself? Or are we in, I'm below the line, and there are one or two things that I need, and here's a resource that I trust who might be able to help me? You know, for me, in the same year I was diagnosed with MS, I had preemie twins who were 25 weeks gestation, and they spent 4 months in the hospital. And I had a 2-year-old. I, for the first time in my life, could not do it all by myself. Like, I couldn't keep them alive. If I brought them home, they'd die. The doctors did. I was the most useless one in the room. So there's a humility, and I don't mean humiliation. That's a different word. There is a power in being real and clear and humble. We are in community for a reason. We are weak, slow, tasty animals. There is no reason that we should have evolved, except that we live in community and we have an empathy gene in our brain. So if we are not using our community, then we are not using our resources to help us stay accountable to what we want. So here's the tough question. I promised you I would get to the tough question, and I wanted to get to it, and then we can open it up for discussion a little bit more. I am going to go, and Nikki, help me keep an eye on the screen for this one. So there are two ways for me to phrase this question. One is more G-rated, and one involves the S word. Are we comfortable in this conversation with mild profanity? Can I see hands if that's a yes or a no? Are we okay, Nikki? I just like to check with people because I don't want to be unprofessional. Okay. If you remember nothing else besides the 2 A's and this question, you will make me happy. The tough question is, and every single choice we have comes down to this: what do I want, and what's the shit sandwich I'm willing to eat to get it? Because that breaks it down and makes it really clear. And I love that question so much that my 16-year-old knows it. So we'll be, and it comes up all the time. We'll be like, oh, maybe this is the shit sandwich. Am I willing to eat that shit sandwich? And if I want what I say I want as much as I say I want it, then I'm gonna eat the shit sandwich. Now, I can figure out what condiments to put on it. I can figure out how to make it tastier. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a shit sandwich, right? So the question is for accountability, and I'm so glad that question came up. The accountability is about the shit sandwich. Because if I'm not willing to say no to the meeting, if I'm not willing to basically say no, is what it comes down to. If I'm not willing to prioritize self, if I'm not willing to take the actions necessary to create the reality that I say I want, then at the end of the day, I'm not willing to eat the shit sandwich. That's not a bad thing. It just is a great opportunity for clarity. Because if I'm not willing to eat the shit sandwich, then that's great data for me that I don't want what I say I want as much as I think I want it. So if I'm not willing to eat the shit sandwich, that gives me a great piece of information. This is why I love this saying so much, because there's no judgment in it. If I'm not willing to eat the shit sandwich, don't eat it. But then take a look at what you want. And if what you want is actually exactly what you have, right? Because sometimes at the end of the day, we have exactly what we want. It doesn't always feel comfortable. Maybe sometimes, but maybe it's working for us. Now, if we take that back and we say, you know what, I'm not willing to eat that shit sandwich, so I don't want this, but what I'm in right now isn't working, then we have an opportunity to go back to that first question, which is, what do I want? How bad do I want it? And am I willing to eat the shit sandwich? So with that, I am going to stop sharing Oh, I have one more little slide that I just think is cute. Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot. So this is my second to last slide. So the question that I want to leave you guys with, and we can open up the floor and discuss any and all of this, but a really powerful question that I want to leave you guys with, series, is how do I want to feel? So we looked at the beginning of how I actually feel right now, right? We had lots of great exploration there. The next question is, how do I want to feel? All right, and maybe just put one word, how I feel. Next word, how do I want to feel? What's one choice I can make today? We're not looking for a grand revolution. One choice that's easy, manageable, maybe a little bit of a stretch, practicing some new skills that I can make today to start to feel that way. And am I willing to eat the shit sandwich? And then finally, I love Dr. Seuss. He's like the great wisdom bearer of all time. So be sure when you step with care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. So given that, I'd like to open the floor. What's coming up with for you guys around vulnerability, asking for help, how you want to feel?
Hi, Banks. This is
Hey,
Teresa Huerta. Hi. So maybe it's because I haven't had enough coffee already this morning, but I got a little lost in the shit sandwich part.
We all do, girl. We all do.
I'm thinking I maybe just need a little more explanation, or can you give me an example of a shit sandwich that you were willing to eat?
Sure. I'll give you an example that is a real shit sandwich. You ready? So online school sucks. And it just sucks. It sucks for my family, you know, for us. I'm just going to name that. I have kids who are doing okay, kids who are not doing okay, like, and I have zero intention of being a homeschool teacher. Zero. It won't work for us. We fight, we cry. So if I want to have harmony in my home, and I would love to have harmony in my home, but I mean, the larger harmony in my home. And if I want to survive online learning, and I want that, I want to be able to be my kid's mom, not their teacher. The shit sandwich that I eat is looking at F's and D's on their report card. And that has to be okay with me. And my kid's in 8th grade, and his grades don't really matter. And he doesn't have only F's and D's, but he has like an F, a D, an A minus, a B. Like he's all over the map. Mm-hmm. So how do I make that shit sandwich taste better? I can find outside resources. I can talk to his teacher. I can help him build accountability skills. I can realize that it's developmentally appropriate for him to be struggling. I can realize that this is a resilience building exercise. I can realize that this is an opportunity for him to learn that sometimes struggle is okay. You know, and I can learn that I have an ability to say, I'm not your teacher and I'm not going to sit down with you at school every day. Because I did that, and I have twins. So I had to do 4 hours of each of their school twice, and it was crazy making. And it lasted a minute. And I was like, this is not going to work for anybody. I'm disempowering my kids. So my shit sandwiches, I have to be willing to let go of seeing my kid be, air quotes, successful at school. And I need to redefine what success means. Does that help?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Another example would be, I want to go work out because I have MS and I need to go move my body, or I'm going to end up in a wheelchair. I don't want that to happen, right? So when a client says, I have this urgent thing and I have the opportunity to go work out or do work I love, help a client and make X dollars, both of those things are really important to me. So I have to decide, am I willing to say no, go work out, and eat the shit sandwich of maybe having my client be irritated that we have to push it off till tomorrow, right? Or not make the money. And they, more often than not, the shit sandwich is really not as big of a deal as I thought it was, right? Does that help with a couple of different examples?
So good. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. What else, you guys?
Thanks. I just want to piggyback off of that comment that you made, because I think we are, you know, we kind of put ourselves often at the center of our universe as we're the only one that can solve this problem for this individual, this client, this child. And I think you're right. I think there are some times where it's like, maybe they can figure it out for themselves.
Right.
If we're not there as the problem, you know, the ultimate problem solver in that moment, that it's not always a bad thing.
And with other people, especially, there's a lot of great psychological research about how we can affirm grit, how we can affirm struggle, and say, and just name it. Wow, this looks like it's really hard. I know you can figure this out. I'm confident that you have what it takes to work through this. And if in 20 minutes you still need my help, feel free to come back, but I want to see you try. You know, that I think so often, as this works with our work teams as well, there's an element, you know, for a lot of us who are micromanagers, this comes up with my leadership teams a lot. You know, if we're a micromanager, we feel like we're the only person who can do something, it's incredibly patronizing, right? It's not a relationship built on trust, and we're not validating their own innate abilities to solve their own problems, right? So are we in a, and I mean, we can think of this in terms of work-life balance and from a servant leadership standpoint, and a servant leadership standpoint to self. We have to trust ourselves to be able to know what we need and accomplish it without seeking outside help. I mean, yes, outside help of like, oh, I need somebody to help me with this task, or I need somebody to help me with this task, but not outside help for, I need someone to tell me how to be balanced. We have those skills inside. We just need to attach them to what we want and the choice points. Katie said she wants to feel at peace with the decisions she's making, that she wants to feel balanced. Being at peace with the decisions we make is all about awareness and clarity. That's where we start to get to the point. If we're at peace with what we want, if we're at peace with the shit sandwich, and that we're willing to eat it, which basically means we're willing to, you know, eat any consequences of our actions, then we feel clear about the decision. And to me, clarity equals peace. It doesn't mean that we're always, air quotes, happy, but it does mean that we're clear. And one of the great quotes that I've heard recently is the definition, the distinction between joy and clarity. And joy is knowing, it's internal, and is knowing who we are, what we are, and how we are, right? Who we are, what we are, and how we are. And that's an internal job. Happy, air quotes, because I think that's one of the worst words in the English language, it's not a thing, is something that we get from extrinsic sources, people, places, and things. And it tends to be fleeting. And let's talk about control for a second with happiness. If we're looking for other people to give us happiness, we're giving up a ton of power. We're giving out extrinsic things all of the power over our emotional well-being. We're giving up all of our emotional real estate to things that we have no agency over. So one thing that I like to think is you're giving away free real estate in your brain. So if we want to feel at peace with the decisions we're making, it really is about that clarity. It's about knowing what choices we're making, why we're making them, how we're making them, what the consequences are. We're willing to accept those consequences. How do I release the disappointment I feel when I've asked for help and people don't follow through or meet my standard? How do I not take that personally? That's a great question, Shannon. Thank you for bringing that up. It comes back to that point of when people show you who they are, believe them. You know, and it's not that people, so releasing the disappointment, you know, forgiveness practice is hard. It's just hard. And I know, Shannon, I know you well, and I know that, you know, that you have a strong mindfulness practice. So you can definitely leverage your mindfulness practice in that piece. The next piece is, what evidence are you getting from that interaction? Right? Is this someone that you can count on for that? Right? And the idea there being to start being intentional about who we reach out to for what. A classic example is when my kids were in the hospital, there were people who showed up for us, and there were people who completely disappeared. And there were people in our family who showed up for us, and there were people who disappeared. There were close friends who disappeared. There were distant friends who showed up. It's about empathy and experience. And I have no judgment in saying that. It was just, there were people who could meet us in an incredibly difficult traumatic space because they had a similar experience or an empathy piece there that they could draw on. And then there were people who could not. And it became very clear that we have multiple relationships for a reason, right? So releasing the disappointment is about understanding that that person maybe just wasn't capable of meeting us in this space. And they can meet us in lots of other spaces, and we can still love them. but maybe we need another person for this type of support. I have girlfriends and I have a husband. Those are very different relationships, right? I don't, sleep with or try to manage a family business with my girlfriends, right? I talk to them about my husband. Like we have these different relationships to draw on for different needs. So asking for help is hard. It's about testing the waters. It's about not, ripping open the shower curtain. You dip your toe in the water, start to ask for, for help of different things, and then just listen to the evidence we get back from that person. What are their capabilities? What are the limits of where they can meet us and what we need? And then another piece that I love is where you say they don't follow through or meet my standard. Shit sandwich alert, right? Because if we're gonna ask for help, then we need to be okay with how they choose to help us, right? And maybe it's an opportunity to take a look at our standards. Shannon, gentleness and grace are not easy for anyone, except maybe the Dalai Lama, and probably he works at it too. Harmony, I love this. I think we see balance as this tidy, beautiful thing. However, getting to balance can be messy and not look how we think. Print. I think absolutely 100% balance is messy. Life is messy. Balance is a constant practice of awareness, evaluation, without navel gazing, staying in the moment, staying aware, staying present with where we are, what we need, what our resources are, what actions we're willing to take to get there. And it really is just course correcting. And when we can start to get more immediate, when we start this practice and we start getting more comfortable with asking for help, we start getting more comfortable with identifying what we need, who our resources are. At the beginning, it feels like a big scary. So we just make it a little scary. We find one friend we can ask for a little thing. What's one thing? It's that question. How do I want to feel? What's one thing I can do today to start to feel that way? And as we start doing that more and more, and as we start realizing that everything we do and everything we want has a shit sandwich, right? We can start going, then the balancing act becomes more refined. And as we get closer, as the pendulum isn't swinging way over here and then we have to correct and it all of a sudden goes way over here and then we're correcting and it kind of gets a little closer and a little closer and a little closer. And we start to get to this area where it's almost like, you guys know those things you would see at the Exploratorium where it's the balls hanging from the strings, you do one and it would kind of bang off the other side and bang off the other side and all that. It's kind of like that. The more we can get the balls closer together, so they're just kind of going like this, then it becomes more intuitive and less messy. So but it is still very much active. It's an active practice, but you're absolutely right. It is not, at least in my experience and the experience of my clients who are working on this, it tends to be untidy. And I'm going to argue that that's what makes it awesome. Because it's in those challenging questions that we really start to get clear about who we are, what we are, and how we want to show up on the planet and support other people. And that's how we get resilient. And that's how we survive global plagues and working from home with kids at school. What other questions you guys have for me? I'm happy to stay on as long as you guys are free.
Hey, Banks.
Hey, Pilar.
I think one of the things that I'm learning is that it's okay to have ebbs and flows and sometimes not to be in balance. You have to be okay with that and not expect that you're going to be in balance now that you have these tools and you have a better understanding. It's just part of life, right? There's going to be bad days and there's going to be rough days and ugly, smelly, messy days. It's just the way that it is.
Joyful, beautiful, gorgeous
exactly.
days.
And that's where I get the balance and just knowing, this isn't forever. This is just a moment. My mom used to say, this too shall pass. So I try not to, overanalyze or over expect things to work a certain way, and when they don't, spending a whole lot of time picking it apart and understanding why. I think you know, that's something that attending things like this webinar reminds me of, and just sort of brings me back into a centered place that, you know what, it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be explainable. You don't, you know, no one has to get it but you. And so thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And, you know, I know we've gone a bit over. You know, we can go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you for coming. And I'm also happy to stay on, as I said. So, you know, Shannon, Christina, Annie, Teresa, anybody, if you didn't get a chance to say what you'd like to say, I'm here. But thank you all for coming. This has been such a joy and a pleasure. It truly is a gift to me to spend this time with you this morning. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Nikki, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. Oh, Banks, you're an impossible act to follow. Very grateful